Hi everyone, I'm Ella Romero and I'm going to take you through my process of creating my thesis work called There Once. I accidentally came across this thought on Twitter and immediately knew I had to share it in this talk. It's by illustrator Anthony Holden, and it says, "Some of your work has to be self-indulgent to remind you of what you love and why you do what you do." The process of developing my own voice and confidence as an artist and a person was put into overdrive over the past 2 years while attending this program. And one of the hardest things I've struggled with my entire life is believing that what I have to say is worth saying and hearing. We all have these self-deprecating moments, no matter how confident and established we are. It takes self-knowledge and acceptance to move past them. I was always doing something creative growing up, and was a devoted fan of many books and cartoons, the characters and illustration styles of which I consider dear. I never felt like I had my own strong style or voice. Rather, I found that I jumped between pulling from these influential, successful creators and their established worlds. Books were my refuge, portals into worlds into which I could or never would step foot, being a very timid and quiet child. I liked the idea that I could vicariously live out adventures through the characters in the stories I read, observing from a safe distance and learning from their mistakes without risking anything of my own. When I created art, however, it was based on what I observed in real life, as I still felt more comfortable copying or borrowing rather than taking the leap of creating my own realities. I lusted after the large sets of colorful markers and blank sketchbooks, but the ones I had often stayed blank, because the chance that I wouldn't make something instantly great was scarier than leaving these tools pristine. In college, I majored in art history, which I loved, but most related careers would not involve much art making. I did not feel qualified to work as an artist, so I felt stuck. Actually, making art would remain a hobby, as I considered what my next professional step would be. Soon after college, however, I started work at a local stationery store in Brooklyn, where after some pinch hitting and quick learning, I became one of the illustrators, designers, and calligraphers in a small but mighty multitasking team. The store's bread and butter is creating custom invitations, mostly for weddings, and I enjoyed meeting all the couples who wanted something unique that told their love story. It wasn't all cheesy. In fact, a lot of the clientele was untraditional and creative, so I enjoyed the different and sometimes even humorous challenges that each invitation provided me. I developed immensely as an illustrator and a graphic designer, learning to work under deadlines and to anticipate and interpret visions based on someone else's prompts. What we'd create together ranged from classic and romantic to funky and irreverent, and I think by now I have drawn every animal and placed it onto the Brooklyn Bridge at least once. I used combinations of traditional and digital drawing, typesetting, painting, hand lettering, pointed pen calligraphy, brush pen, charcoal, and each commission was a stepping stone towards becoming a stronger artist. It was great to help people create these physically printed memories, but I could only address envelopes to the future Mr. and Mrs. and draw chihuahuas and bow ties so many times before I got restless. I hadn't worked on my own art for so long, devoting all my time and energy to realizing other people's visions. The wonder that other people would actually pay money for my work never waned, but I needed to discover what I wanted to do next with my own creative toolset. In 2015, 3 years into my stationery career, I finally jumped off a cliff I had been eyeing for a while and sent in an application to a graduate program that sounded like heaven. I'd been hemming and hawing about not being good enough for at least a year, and finally, with the deadline almost in my face, I pulled 2 all-nighters and clicked submit. And so starts my journey to this podium. The visual narrative program took the 2 halves of my being, one that loved words and one that loved images, and brought them to a place where it was okay to experiment with them both together. Like this illustration, I felt like I was always precariously balancing feeling confident enough to do either. It never felt right to work with only one. One of our first assignments was to create a list of personal traits that we felt were absolutely essential to our beings, within the categories of person, place, and thing. We then chose 5 per category and illustrated them. I hadn't looked at these since June of 2015 when I created them, and they are not only still true, but also appear in some way in my thesis, which I'll get to later. This exercise in introspection was already causing something to germinate early on. These qualities led to the development of my first original character, Nil. She is tiny, independent, and stubborn, and I don't know where she gets it from. I felt out of my depth coming up with something and someone all on my own. I can write until the cows come home, but having to actually visualize an original entity with a history and personality from scratch was not something I had ever done before. For one assignment, I put Nil into a square glass, which I sectioned off into 4 sides like panels of a comic, and sculpted out of clay, balsa wood, paint, and paper, her dealing with an unexpected, aggressive roof leak. You can imagine a torrential downpour into the home of a very small creature is overwhelming, but she very quickly regains control of the situation through quick thinking and hard work. Working with physical materials in 3D like this was a welcome challenge and change from the flat, static imagery I usually created. Fast forward about 3 hellish weeks, and Nil starts in Breach, her own 5-minute rudimentary film about a cult of whales who kidnap her. I thought I was going to die after this project, but somehow I came back for more. I can even watch it now. After 8 weeks of the most writing and art I had churned out in a long time, if not ever, and learning what my body and mind's limits were very quickly, I had shot through my shallow roof as an artist and had added sound and movement to my tool belt. Later projects only continued to see me pushing through my comfort zone and complaining about it the whole way. Many times I turned to digital media in the interest of saving time, but any opportunity I had to use actual paint and ink was taken. On the left is a panel from my biography of nonagenarian fashion icon Iris Apfel, an article on the exhibit of her personal fashion collection at the Met Museum. On the right is a poster inspired by the Natural Historical Collection of Alberto Seba. I used watercolor to paint shells, animals, and insects to spell out the categories these items were filed into. Both these projects not only enabled me to work with physical media, but also let me explore personal collections of things which I found interesting. Though I think my work for the program jumps around a lot in terms of style and topic, I can now see patterns like this emerging that others say they can instantly recognize as mine. My work for our digital short story project was what I considered to be mini-thesis. I had never worked on a story that long, for that long, ever before, and I still had little idea of what was coming for me in the year after this. Wonder Boy is the story of awkward teen Jackson, who is unhappy to learn that he is actually an alien when an excitable green creature that calls itself Stevie Wonder visits him. The format of this project was probably my most ambitious undertaking yet, and involved in this order: drawing, watercolor painting, X-Acto knife cutting, gluing, staging a set, photography, editing and retouching, and digital typesetting. What came out was a multimedia comic that looks as kooky as it sounds. In the back of the printed book I ordered for the digital short story exhibit in June of 2016, I included 2 pages of behind-the-scenes photos showing my messy and experimental process. This insider information was received just as positively as the finished product itself and showed me that people were interested in how I make the things I make. Using this many types of media all together to create one cohesive project was a huge milestone for me. So I began to wonder what my thesis was going to look like. I had tried out something different for practically every project I had done in the program to date, while simultaneously strengthening and extending the skills I already had. A running theme throughout many of the stories I wrote and adapted was the idea of collection. I loved how things came together into one entity and what that said about the person who collected them. I am a sentimental pack rat, and I love collecting souvenirs from places I've been and experiences I've had. Having these items around instantly recalls memories, and I love the unique symbolism we attach to items we collect like this. The same can be said of words or phrases. The more unique something is to you, the more likely it is that you will remember it. We all collect things mentally as well as literally, and that act and the emotions that compel and result from it are fascinating to me. The practice of collecting has taken countless forms over the ages and been the result of countless compulsions. In Renaissance Europe, scholars and nobles began forming what became known as cabinets of curiosities, complicated collections of everything from shells to taxidermied animals to weapons to human skeletons, displayed for easy sharing and showing off. The contents or theme of a cabinet varied according to its owner's interests and connections. Though mostly focusing around specimens of natural history, decorative embellishments and man-made items were also often displayed, speaking to the owner's personality, wealth, and superior education and taste. This connection between human expression, education, curiosity, and a physical location has always been interesting to me. All these concepts and stories are compressed into a single place, like a room, or a book, or a picture. In his 2002 History of Curiosity Cabinets, author Patrick Morier describes them as resulting from a desire to bring all knowledge into a single space. The word souvenir comes from the French for to remember, and we collect souvenirs compulsively to do just this. While curiosity cabinets are memory collections that exist out in the physical world, there are also memory palaces, which are created within an individual's mind. To explain, it is a mnemonic technique developed in ancient Greece that uses both your familiarity with a physical location and your imagination to aid in recalling sequences of items. Feel free to give it a try sometime. Imagine a place you know well. Then imagine each item on your list in sequence being placed into this location, along the path that you might walk through it. Bonus points for how bizarrely you do this. For example, if you're remembering a grocery list, start by hanging pizza by its melting cheese from the doorway, or having a lampshade by the window spurt a fountain of skim milk. The idea is then that the next time you imagine yourself walking through this location, you'll remember these out-of-place items as you pass them. We naturally seek out patterns everywhere as an attempt to make sense of our surroundings and experiences. It's part of how we both learn new information and remember previous lessons. The if-then story of our experiences teaches us to remember how we feel about certain things, people, actions, or locations, and therefore also teaches us how to act in response. Memory is storytelling. I knew this had to be a huge part of my next work. So my thesis format began to take shape. Combining the eclectic objects in a curiosity cabinet, the sentiment and location needed for a memory palace, and my interest in using all different media, I started to see how I could house the story I was going to tell about my own collections. Then my classmate Christina added, "If your thesis doesn't include magical critters, I'm going to hunt you down." I was starting to gather pieces of what this story could be. Here I am with my maternal grandmother and her alarmingly high waistband. Much of my personality and education were derived from her and my mother, her eldest daughter. I grew up here in the United States, whereas my immediate family emigrated here from the Philippines. In 2004, my grandmother returned alone to the country she had missed for 16 years. 10 years later, we learned that she had stage 4 endometrial cancer. Where's my tissue? And I dropped everything and flew to the Philippines for the first time as an adult to surprise her and say goodbye. Though physically deteriorating, her mind and tongue both remained razor sharp, refreshed by the opportunity to continue her closest grandchild's education about her heritage in situ. Every name and place and date were recalled without effort. She died less than a week after I got back to New York. She kept meticulous photo albums, which I loved to leaf through. Many of them I had never seen because they had been left in the Philippines, and I am ever grateful that I got to be there with her in person to see them for the first time. The thought of somehow losing these physical memories would break my heart. They contribute to my sense of home and history, of belonging, and seeing into the past and future at once like this thrills me. So I had several pieces of this looming project in my hands, but still I felt unsure about if I could do it. Even though I enjoyed creating work, my self-consciousness prevented me from doing more or sharing what I did. If I made mistakes or had a negative experience, even just once, a very specific rule was formed and that thing was ruined forever. The experiences and their triggers became superstitions, warnings that keep me safe from ever feeling those feelings again. All of this led to my thesis project, There Once. Here is a list of things I struggle with. Also, here's a list of things in my thesis. You may note this is the same list. Somewhere over the past year, I decided I was going to take the things about myself that make me the most uncomfortable, engage them all together, and then display the results in a public gallery in the middle of New York City. What could possibly go wrong? I began to write a story about a young woman whose fear of failure and her own insecurity led her to have a very strange sort of mental breakdown. She documents her experience by writing blog posts and recording voice memos. I decided to tell this story using memory palaces and curiosity cabinets as the vehicles through which her story is captured. Using everything from paper to clay to wood to feathers to prose to voice acting to ambient sound to very basic carpentry to maquette building and whatever is left between all of those things, I created a multimedia story that meshes the analog and digital together and made me as comfortable as I can currently get with being uncomfortable. My protagonist, Rena, is an ambitious young woman whose artistic inclination and need for control and organization served her well in architecture school. Devoting all her energy to achieving professional success, she closes herself off from her past to focus on the future. In doing this, she estranges herself from her family, including her imaginative grandmother, who filled her childhood with magic, folklore, and art, childish hobbies in which real adults do not dabble. Agtat, the sinister demon from Rena's childhood nightmares, suddenly reappears to her as a vision in the middle of an important work event. She then learns that her grandmother has passed away, and her mother begs her to come home. Overwhelmed by guilt, despair, and fear, Rena moves back into her childhood home, thinking she has lost both her career and her mind. The stressful visions of Agtat continue, and to her dismay are joined by visions of her imaginary best friend, the mischievous and spontaneous Rafi. Together, the unexpected reappearances of these two imaginary creatures into Rena's austere, isolated adult life begin a domino effect on the walls that she has built up around herself. By bravely embracing the loss of the control she thought she had, she learns what her real priorities are and how to speak up for them. This complex and strange story clearly became a vehicle through which I, as a writer and artist, tried to make sense of my world, my family, and my emotions. By injecting elements of the fantasy and folklore I love to read and visualize into a roughly autobiographical script, through the growth of my character, I strove to admit and address the doubt I felt in myself. I designed an installation of my own Curiosity Cabinet Memory Palace hybrid, which a viewer must walk through, surrounded by darkness and hastily scrawled disconnected thoughts on walls, to reach a room that is a physical representation of Rena's mind. The left half contains her online blog, which collects her prose blog posts and audio recordings into one diary that she has meticulously curated herself in an attempt to make sense of her experience. The right half of the room contains 3 cabinets, which are her memories manifested into physical objects, that from right to left show her development from repressed and isolated, submerged in childhood memory, to finally an open, whimsical, and celebratory state of mind. The devil is in the details, and in addition to creating a physically overwhelming and intimate environment for my story, I strove to capture the emotions that both I and my protagonist were struggling against in each drawer of each cabinet. The magnitude of this undertaking, while cathartic and thrilling on some days, also caused some of the most debilitating anxiety attacks I'd ever experienced. Not only was I creating a story that hit too close to home, I had also given myself an immense amount of work that I could not possibly realize by myself, and I spiraled as frequently as my character did. However, as I grew stronger, I tried to fuel this emotion into the work and not allow myself to run away, as I had in the past from things I thought were bigger than me, or stay silent and closed off because speaking the truth aloud was too hard. I also tried to allow the many people who wanted to and cared about helping me actually help me. Some of whom know me so well they knew when to step in even when I couldn't ask. Many of these emotions and concepts, which also plagued my character Rena, became the physical objects that went into the drawers in my installation of cabinets. Some drawers symbolize isolation, inability to speak or make sense, loss, disruption, searching, fragility, discovery, and comfort. I don't know where this will take me, but despite the toll this project has taken on me, mentally and physically, I cannot believe what I've been able to accomplish with the help of this amazing program, faculty, and student body. Man, the dust in this room, am I right? Constantly encouraging and pushing me further alongside family and friends. I'm eternally grateful for all those who wouldn't let me run. I want to further explore media work like this, multimedia work like this, and to continue to let my past inspire me to move forward and use my voice instead of letting me hang back in fear. Thank you. What is the next step? I'm not entirely sure. It was really important to me to use a lot of different media and approaches in this project because I knew I didn't want to spend 9 months sitting at a table with a piece of paper or staring at a screen, which is how I usually created my work. So I really wanted to give myself a ton of different little things to do, which, as I've mentioned before, was both really fun and a huge mistake. So the magnitude of all these little things that I had to keep going all at once was really tough, but it was important to me because I knew about myself through a lot of my work in this program that I like to jump around and that I really need the variety. So moving forward, I want to continue to learn to use a lot of different media and just push out of my comfort zone because I learned a lot about myself and a lot about different tools that I didn't know about. And that's really exciting to me. That learning process and those collecting of those memories will always influence how I tackle things. So I'm hoping to do more with 3D fabrication, whether it's set design or prop design or stuff like that. So even though the illustration and the calligraphy and all of that will always be a part of me, I would love to move forward into 3D and pushing the material boundaries that I had in the past. Well, drawing is always going to be a part of me. It's how I started moving into art. It was the sort of most accessible method and media that I had growing up. And while I did not create any Super Pets comics, it was something that I always did, I always turned to, and it's always going to be there for me. So it will always inform my work, but I'm interested in moving away from that where I can, just to expand my own horizons. I get really attached to the things I make, so we had talked as a class about if anybody is interested in taking some of the elements of this on installation as art pieces or whatever, we could offer that as an option. And if somebody made me an offer for something, I would consider it, but I just assumed that I would keep everything. And because this project is so personal, because it's so personal, it will always be something that I can create more things of. I can always be generating more sculptures, more objects, more blog posts, which was something I really wanted to do more, getting back to writing in that way. I can always be generating more, so I don't know what to do with the things I have right now, but it's definitely a subject matter that I would like to continue churning stuff out for. And I don't have a specific plan for the stuff that's downstairs, but I know that I would like to keep sharing the story and keeping it growing and evolving, because there are so many things that I couldn't fit into it, and it's already so freaking complicated. So the short answer is I'm not sure right now, but there have been a lot of people who say, I could imagine this as a play, I could imagine this as this or that, and I'm just so glad that I survived making what I have, that if anything else came up from this, I would totally be open, because I know that I have opened up from making this project. So if anything comes my way, I'm open to it. I did a lot of polymer clay sculpting for this thesis project, and I had done small scale stuff before, but I'd never done a full figure. So the Agta demon was terrifying for me, because I don't consider myself great with figure drawing and anatomy and all of that stuff. So That was really a learning process, and I think I messed with it and like worked with it a lot before it got to a place where I felt it would be okay, and I've gotten really good feedback from it, from Ben too. So I definitely have seen myself improve through this particular project. I couldn't let myself edit the same little things as much as I normally would have because there was just so much to get through. So that was also in itself a good milestone, just like being able to move on and leave things as they are and just like accept them. But yeah, I definitely, in particular with polymer clay sculpting, I am very proud that I was able to do these like larger scale maquettes, which I'd never done before, and get good feedback. All right, thank you.